Everyone, this is David Blakey, and the name of this video is Python Regular Expressions, an introduction. In this video, we'll just look at the basics of regular expressions and how we can use them to match patterns to text. So what do we mean by a pattern? Well, a pattern is simply a kind of a way of describing text. It could be as simple as ABC. If we had a string like my string equals, let's say, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and our pattern was ABC, we could easily perform a match to see whether ABC is within A, B, C, D, E, F, G by doing the following. If re.search name of pattern and then my string print matched. Else print not match. Let's try that and see what happens. Okay, it says that it matched. Why don't we go ahead and force it to not match? Put an X in there and see if it will match. That did not match. So you can see that the pattern ABXC doesn't appear within ABCDFG. And so it didn't match. Notice we're using a new method or a new function that we haven't discussed yet called re.search. We talk about it in the class, of course. re.search takes a pattern like ABXC and applies it to a string like ABCDEFG. You can see represented here by the label myString. And if it does match, we get back a true. That is, we can place re.search in an if statement, and it will tell us whether it matched or didn't. This is the most basic idea of a regular expression matching, that we simply have a pattern that either matches or doesn't, depending on whether it can be found. Now, there's a couple of things to keep in mind. First is that the pattern matcher looks at a string with a pattern in mind and looks at it character by character to decide whether or not the pattern is there. So it begins by, in this case, it's going to apply the DEF pattern to my string, looks on the first character and sees an A and says, well, that doesn't match. Then a B, and that doesn't match. C doesn't match. Okay, D matches. Does it follow by an E? Yes. Does it follow by an F? Yes. Matched. Now the regular expression engine is done with this particular match. It just goes character by character looking for a match. And there's two things to keep in mind. The first is it doesn't care whether the pattern is the whole of the string, obviously. You can see that DEF is only part of the string. It's not the whole string. Therefore, we can say that it simply tries to apply the pattern to a part of the string, and if it can get a part of the string to match, then it's a match. Second thing is the idea of consecutiveness, that the match needs to be consecutive characters. For example, if I put in DE space F, would it match? Would DE space F match? No, it doesn't match. Why not? Because it's looking for a consecutive match. It's looking for a D followed by an E followed by a space and doesn't find the space. Then it doesn't give up. Then it goes back and it says, all right, is that a D? No. Is that a D? No. Is that a D? No. Okay, I didn't manage to match. Tried the whole string and couldn't match it. Now, of course, our patterns are going to get more elaborate than just literal characters, as we see here. But this is the basic idea of matching. Notice also that when we run this match and we get back not match, we don't get any feedback about it. There's nothing in there that feeds back. In fact, if we didn't put in a not print statement, we wouldn't get anything back. That is, this is simply saying if it did match, print matched. Otherwise, well, that's the end of the program. So where's our feedback as to what part matched and what part didn't? Why doesn't it say, oh, I failed to match on the third character of your test pattern, the space? Because pattern matches don't work that way. They either match or they don't, and it's not considered an error if they don't match. There's going to be plenty of examples where we'll be searching for certain bits of text in a file of many lines, and maybe 5 lines out of 100 match. Well, the ones that don't match don't create an error because we're not expecting it to match necessarily everywhere. We're simply testing to see if it does match, and if it doesn't, it returns false. How do we know it returns false? Because we've placed it in an if expression. If research, now we could try printing it to see, well, what we get back is an object, and we'll talk about that later. Last thing I'll mention is that the R and then a string quotes after it. This is something called a raw string. Now, a raw string is a regular string, but it doesn't have any escapes in it. What's an escape? Well, let's take my string, for example. If we put a new line at the end of my string, it would be a line with a new line at the end. And if we opened up a file and looked at each line in the file, it would be represented as a string with a new line at the end. The new line simply tells the screen, or let's say a file, that we've reached the end of the line. And as far as the screen goes, to drop down and return to the left to get to the next line. In other words, the new line is expressed as a carriage return, what we call a carriage return. I bet you don't know why it's called a carriage return. It used to be that typewriters used to march back and forth across a page in something called a carriage. The carriage would hold the element that would actually do the printing of a typewriter. That's what's called a carriage. Or it might hold the paper and move the paper back and forth across the typewriter, if you've ever seen an old typewriter. So we sometimes call a new line, we'll say that a new line results in a carriage return. That simply means that the cursor is going to go back to the left and drop down a line. So remember with regular expressions, matching, we're matching on consecutive characters, and we're also matching on any characters within the string. This kind of thing will come up again. Generally, people will make assumptions. For example, with the consecutives, I mentioned that before, they might see D, E, and F and say, oh, well, it's all in there. It's all in there. But does this pattern, D, E, F, match this pattern up here? Well, yeah, it does have a D, an E, and an F, but that doesn't mean that it matches. We're looking for consecutive matches. So that's the first thing to keep in mind. Matches will be consecutive. I'll just say RE matches. RE matches will be consecutive. Second thing to keep in mind is this idea of a substring. That is, whether the pattern matches anywhere in the string. You see the DEF here pattern matches the DEF string, and we can run it to see that that's true. And it does. It matches. Great. It matches. Wonderful. Whoops. Keep clearing the screen. Great. That matches. Terrific. So then, after lulling you into a sense of security, I'll then say, all right, well, is that going to match? Now, if you are thinking in terms of a string equivalence, you might say, no, you just added a G. DEF is not the same as DEFG. But at that point, you'd be ignoring the fact that we're talking about substring match. That is, does the pattern match anywhere in the string? It doesn't have to be the whole string. We'll talk about cases where it needs to be the whole string, but for right now, it doesn't need to be the whole string. It simply needs to look character by character. And in fact, sometimes I'll do this, and I'll put in a bunch of terrible punctuation to make it, whoops, to make it look like, oh my goodness, how could it possibly match that? DEF isn't anything like all these awful characters. Well, all right, character by character, the engine looks for a D, looks here, doesn't find a D here, doesn't find a D here, keeps going till finally it does find a D, followed by an E, followed by an F. Fantastic. That's your match. It doesn't matter that we've added a lot of other characters. We're not looking for string equivalence. So the second thing to remember, right, unless specified otherwise. We'll look in the next, I believe, we'll look at the next video, we'll look at cases in which we need an exact match between a pattern and a string. But keep these two ideas in mind. They're going to come in handy later. and let's move on after the end of this video. Thanks for watching.